8. Competency-based language teaching, standards, and a common European framework of reference. Introduction. There is a common way to developing language courses. First is to make decisions about what to teach, then determine how to teach it, and finally to assess what was learned. With this process, it is determined that what was learned is somehow the result of what was taught and how well it was taught. This approach to course planning is referred to as forward design in Chapter 21, and often reflects the assumption that the learning outcomes of a course are dependent upon a well-designed syllabus and effective teaching methods. Consequently, we see throughout this book that the discussion of the most appropriate form for syllabus as well as the most appropriate teaching methods have been recurring focus in the language teaching for over 100 of years. However, there is another tradition in educational planning which is referred to as the backward design. This approach begins with a description of learning outcomes or what the learner should be able to do at the end of the course, and issues related to methodology and syllabus follow from the statements of learning outcomes. 1. Competency-based language teaching, CBLT. Introduction. CBLT is an example of an approach as competency-based education or CBE, an educational movement that focuses on the outcomes or outputs of learning in the development of language programs. CBE addresses what the learners are expected to do with the language, however, they learned to do it. The focus on outputs rather than on inputs to learning is central to the competencies perspective. CBE emerged in the United States in the 1970s and advocated defining the educational goals in the terms of precise measurable descriptions of the knowledge, skills, and behaviors students should possess at the end of the course of the study. The characteristics of CBE are described by Schenk, 1978. Competency-based education has much in common with such approaches to learning as performance-based instruction, mastery learning, and individualized instruction. It is outcome-based and is adapted to the changing needs of students, teachers, and the community. Competencies differ from other student goals and objectives in that they describe the student's ability to apply basic and other skills in situations that are commonly encountered by everyday life. Advocates of CBLT see it as a powerful and positive agent of change. Competency-based approaches to teaching and assessment offer teachers an opportunity to revitalize their education and training programs. Not only will the quality of assessment improve, but the quality of teaching and student learning will be enhanced by the clear specification of expected outcomes and the continuous feedback that competency-based assessment can offer. These beneficial effects may have been observed at all levels and kinds of education and training, from primary school to university, and from academic studies to workplace training. Implemented effectively, competency-based education can improve quality and consistency, reduce cost, shorten the time required to graduate, and provide us with the true measures of student learning. We must: Number 1. Measure student learning rather than time. Number 2. Harness the power of technology for teaching and learning. Number 3. Fundamentally change the faculty role. Number 4. Define the competencies and develop valid, reliable assessments. The Center for American Progress recently released a white paper that found competency-based education could be the key to providing quality post-secondary education to millions of Americans at lower cost. In a speech in the fall of 2012, U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan referred to Southern governors' university competency-based degree programs, saying, "While such programs are now the exception, I want them to be the norm." Auerbach 1986 provided a useful review of factors involved in the implementation of CBLT programs and identified 8 key features. Number 1. A focus on successful functioning in society. 2. A focus on life skills. 3. Task or performance-centered orientation. 4. Modularized instructions. 5. Outcomes that are made explicit a priori. 6. Continuous and ongoing assessment. 7. Demonstrated mastery of performance objectives. And number 8. Individualized student-centered instruction. There are said to be several advantages of a competencies approach from the learner's point of view. Number 1. The competencies are specific and practical and can be seen to relate to the learner's needs and interests. Number 2. The learner can judge whether the competencies seem relevant and useful. Number 3. The competencies that will be taught and tested are specific and public. Hence, the learner knows exactly what needs to be learned. And number 4, competencies can be mastered one at a time so the learner can see what has been learned and what still remains to be learned. The approach theory of language, CBLT, is based on a functional and interactional perspective on the nature of language. It seeks to teach language in relation to the social context in which it is used. The following understandings of the nature of language are assumed in CBLT. Number 1. Language is a means of achieving personal and social needs. Number 2. Language links forms and functions. And number 3. Language can be broken down into its component parts. The theory of learning. CBLT has several assumptions in terms of learning theory. Number 1. Language learning is skill-based. CBLT reflects a skill-based view of learning. Skills are integrated sets of behaviors that are learned through practice. They are made up of individual components that may be learned separately and that come together as whole to constitute skilled performance. 2. Successful language performance depends upon practice. Central to the notion skill-based learning that underlies CBLT is the notion of practice. Practice refers to the repeated opportunities to use language over time. Practice is normally accompanied by feedback, allowing the learner to gradually improve his or her performance. The design, objectives. Since CBLT courses are developed as a response to perceived learners' specific goals and needs, it needs analysis, or the process of determining learners' needs. It is the starting point in developing the objectives for CBLT-based course. Needs analysis procedures may include interviews, questionnaires, observation, tests, and other means that can be used to determine appropriate course objectives. The syllabus. The syllabus for CBLT language course consists of a description of learning outcomes in terms of competencies, so it is important to understand how these differ from the syllabus frameworks. Docking 1994 points out that a traditional approach to developing a syllabus involves using one's understanding of subject matter as the basis for syllabus planning. One starts with a field of knowledge that one is going to teach. Examples given: contemporary European history, marketing, listening comprehension, or French literature. And then selects concepts, knowledge, and skills that constitute the field of knowledge. A syllabus and the course content are then developed around the subject. Competencies consist of a description of the essential skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors required for effective performance of a real-world task or activity. These activities may be related to any domain life, though have typically been linked to the field of work to social survival in a new environment. For example, areas for which competencies have been developed in a vocationally oriented ESL curriculum for immigrants and refugees includes task performance, safety, general world-related, work schedules, timesheets, paychecks, social language, job application, or job interview. For the area of retaining a job, the following competencies are described: following instructions to carry out a simple task, respond appropriately to supervisor's comments about quality of work on the job, including mistakes, working too slowly, and incomplete work, request supervisors to check work, report completion of tasks to supervisor, request supplies, ask where object is located, follow oral directions to locate an object, follow simple oral directions to locate a place, read charts, labels, forms, or written instructions to perform a task, state problem and ask for help if necessary. Respond to inquiry as to nature or progress of current task. State amount and type of work already completed. Respond appropriately to work interruption or modification. Competencies for the listening and speaking component of the adult ESL course. For listening, demonstrate understanding of simple words and phrases drawn from learned topics. Identify the main topic of conversation in familiar material. Demonstrate understanding of non-face-to-face speech in familiar contexts such as simple phone conversations and routine announcements. Recognize words that are signal differences between present, past, and future events. Respond appropriately to short emergency warnings. Respond to commands and short directions through physical actions. Demonstrate strategies to check for understanding by asking for repetition or for example. Listen and identify specific information in the context of previously learned language. For speaking, answer simple questions related to basic needs using previously learned phrases or simple sentences. Make statements in the present, past, or future tenses relating to basic needs and common activities using previously learned phrases or simple sentences. Ask questions related to basic needs using previously learned utterances. Communicate simple personal information on the telephone. Give simple commands, warnings, and directions. Ask for and give clarifications. There are types of learning and teaching activities. CBLT is an approach to designing courses but does not imply any particular methodology of teaching. The teacher is free to choose any set of activities or to make use of any methods that will enable learning outcomes to be achieved and the individual competencies to be acquired. Number 1. Instructional activities integrate the 4 languages skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing, to emphasize the holistic nature of language. Number 2. Language tasks in the classroom consist of meaningful interchanges that enhance students' communicative competence. Number 3. Instructional activities focus on the acquisition of communication skills necessary for students to function in real-life situations. Instructions focuses on development of the receptive skills or listening and reading before the development of the productive skills or speaking and writing. Number 5. A variety of grouping activities are used in the classroom to facilitate student-centered instructions. Number 6. Instructional activities are varied to address different learning styles or the oral, visual, and kinesthetic of the students. Number 7. Instructional activities integrate language and culture so that the students learn about the culture in terms of significant and subtle characteristics that compare and contrast with those of their own cultures. 8. Learning activities develop the language necessary for students to access higher-level thought process, the analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And number 9. Instructional activities require students to take active roles in the learning process, transferring critical thinking to real problem-solving situations in their everyday lives. The learner roles. Learners are active participants in the learning process in CBLT. Primary roles assumed for learners are as follows: to monitor their learning reference to the target competencies. Learners need to develop skills in self-assessment to monitor their learning relation to the learning targets. To develop a range of learning strategies. Successful mastery of target competencies depends upon the ability to use strategies to achieve communication. For example, Ruhin, 1975, 45-8. Identify 7 characteristics of good language learners that are applicable to learning within a CBLT framework. They are willing and accurate guessers who are comfortable with uncertainty. They have strong drive to communicate or to learn from communication and are willing to do many things to get their message across. They are often not inhibited and are willing to appear foolish if reasonable communication results. To be able to transfer knowledge and skills to new situations, learners must be prepared to apply skills learned in the classrooms to situations outside of the classroom and hence be prepared to take risks as they seek to apply what they have learned. They are prepared to attend form, constantly looking for patterns in the language. They practice and also seek out opportunities to practice. They monitor their own speech and the speech of others, constantly attending to how well their speech is being received and whether their performance meets the standards they have learned. And lastly, they attend to meaning, knowing that in order to understand the message, it is not sufficient to attend only to the grammar or surface form of language.